particular story happened back in January, but they just secured convictions for 6 now former Mississippi cops who were called by a neighbor in this neighborhood who was concerned that 2 black men were staying the night at a white woman's house. Then this Goon Squad was dispatched and ostensibly kidnapped 2 black men and tortured them for hours at a time.
Yeah.
And it didn't get enough press, and that's why we're going to talk about this, and we'll go on in more detail about why this story is so important, other than what is obvious.
Well, and let's read from reporting from ABC, just because you mentioned this part of the story, Jesse. So the reporting says a white neighbor phoned Rankin County Deputy Brett McAlpin and complained that 2 black men were staying with a white woman inside a Braxton home. McAlpin told Deputy Christian Dedmond, who texted a group of white deputies so willing to use excessive force they called themselves the Goon Squad, "Are y'all available for a mission?" Dedmond asked. So remember, these are cops, a lot of them narcotics investigators. One is a lieutenant, one is a deputy. These are people who have power. They're imbued with power by the state, by the government, to go into people's homes, to arrest people. And this is how they are behaving. They have a little nickname for themselves, and they are known for using excessive force and not reporting it.
Now, the reason I think this story is important is because of the fact that so many people push back and say, well, it's only a few bad apples, and most cops are good people, and I would push back against that. Of course, they are probably good people, but they're bad cops. It's such a slippery topic to even talk about. If you are, first of all, Rankin County, Mississippi is like 150,000 people. It's a small area. This is a small sheriff's department. And if you can find five cops willing to kidnap and torture 2 dudes because they are of a different race than the woman at whose house they're staying, that's a remarkable problem. And then think about the rest of the sheriff's department who know these dudes, who know how they act, know how they think, know how they talk about black people, and they didn't do anything. We had to find out, because of this torture and kidnapping, that there were this many people in one single department in Mississippi that were a problem. That's why we're talking about this.
Right. And the details from insider reporting are very, very disturbing. So let's start just with how the attack began. Quote, Dedmond warned the men to work easy in case of cameras, meaning to knock on the door rather than break it down, the complaint said. Dedmond also told the men no bad mugshots, which means they had the green light to use excessive force on parts of the body not captured in a mugshot. Later that day, the officers barged into the home of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker. They didn't have a warrant, and they entered through a carport door because the front door had a security camera, the complaint says. The officers handcuffed both men and tased them several times before Dedmond shot his gun into the wall and demanded they tell him where the drugs were. While Jenkins and Parker insisted they did not have drugs, the officers began calling the men racial slurs and told them to, quote, stay out of Rankin County and, quote, go back to their side. Rankin County is the suburbs of Jackson and is 74% white. Hinds County, where Jackson is located, is 72% black, according to the U.S. Census.
Now, this is the stuff of Hollywood movies and what took place in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 40s and 30s and 20s. This is sundown town type of shit that we're talking about here. This is go back to your side. You shouldn't be here in the white area of this particular county or municipality in Mississippi. This is still going on. Cops are still enforcing this under color of law. This needs to be rooted out. This needs to be prosecuted all across, not only the South, but anywhere that it's found.
Yeah. And there's going to be some details here that I'm going to read that are very, very disturbing. So if you are not in a position to listen to very violent details, you don't want to listen to violent details, I would recommend just skipping ahead until the The text is no longer on the screen. So according to reporting from Insider, while searching the home, Updike found a dildo, affixed it to the end of a BB gun, and then shoved it into the men's mouths, the complaint says. Dedman also threatened to penetrate the men with the dildo and slapped them with it. After the assault, Elward, and I want you to remember this officer's name because he's going to come up later, held the men down while Dedman poured chocolate syrup, milk, alcohol, and cooking grease on them. Officers then forced the men to shower and took turns tasing them to see whose taser was stronger, charging their tasers a total of 17 times. Outside the house, Elward then removed a bullet from his gun, forced Jenkins onto his knees, and shot into his mouth. But the unloaded gun did not fire, the document says. Elward then put his gun in Jenkins' mouth again, intending to dry fire a second time, but the gun discharged and broke his jaw. I mean, this incident also follows a typical pattern in that I found the report, the incident report that the police filed.
Yeah.
And they turned it over to Insider, and almost the entire thing is redacted. There's very few lines that you can see, but I read you the details of what happened. The details that all 6 officers have pleaded guilty in the case of what happened. Yeah. I want to read now what they submitted, what they said happened. They said on January 24th, 2023, I, investigator blank, we don't know, along with other deputies, responded to a report of narcotic activity. Now, we know that's not what it was. Right. We know it was a racist phone call that they then all agreed to team up and use excessive force, go torture people.
Remember, Goon Squad.
Then they say that they, upon arrival, I came in contact with a black male, Michael Jenkins, and then it's redacted, and all you can see is 2 bags containing what appeared to be methamphetamine.
We now know that that was planted there by these cops.
Yes, so is the next line, I noticed a firearm.
Also planted by, and by the way, this isn't in contention. This isn't a supposition on my part. These are facts that were established during a trial, or excuse me, not during a trial, because they pleaded guilty to all of the things I'm saying.
Well, and remember what I was saying about how they were playing basically Russian roulette with this man.
Yeah.
And shot him while he was bleeding on the ground. They went outside and tried to formulate a plan for how they were going to cover this up. But instead, what they write here is that they called dispatch to send medical to our location. Once medics arrived, Jenkins was transported by ambulance, and he was booked on possession of drug paraphernalia. So they charged him with a crime he did not commit.
Yeah, so rather than explaining that it was attempted murder, torture, kidnapping, it was he got booked for a crime after they tortured and almost killed him. Right. Just a few bad apples, though.
Well, and along that line, at least 5 people have died in the custody of the Rankin Sheriff's Department during an 8-month period in 2021. Insider has sued the sheriff's department trying to get records related to those deaths. At least one of the officers who pled guilty on Thursday, remember the name I told you to remember, Hunter Elward? Well, he was actually involved in one of the deaths in 2021.
Right.
And he tased and beat the man who died. And a Mississippi grand jury declined to press charges against him and other deputies involved in that case due to insufficient evidence.
You see, if that case had been handled properly, any prosecutor went about trying to secure an indictment, they would have. And it would have avoided the most recent case. These 2 black men would have been unkidnapped, unattempted murdered, if the cop had been held accountable in the first place, or at least very likely.
Yeah. So, 6 former police officers pleaded guilty to all charges against them. Thankfully, they are getting consequences.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Professor Carl Tone Jones, Patrick Irvin. And as you can see by the video, we're going to take a deep dive into this case of Mississippi police terrorism. That Trick Daddy song, America, it plays in the background of my head. Even though racism is has refined itself to maintain itself to last this long. Every now and then, you got some people who believe in the old ways, and some of the ones who believe in the old ways, they do terroristic things like this, like overt terroristic things. Because don't get it twisted, terroristic stuff still happens, but it's covert. This is overt terroristic things that have happened in Rankin County, Mississippi, to these unfortunate black men. 2 white police officers terrorized those men. So, let's get all the way up in this. Let's get knee deep up in this. PC, I'm gonna start with you, Pat. I'm gonna unleash you next, but I'm gonna start with PC because Pat, you got that fresh interaction. You going raw, so I'm gonna save that one. But PC, you see the video. You're familiar with the case.
Yeah.
What are your overall thoughts? Like, what do your first thoughts come to mind, rather, when you hear about this case, you heard about this case, when you were relearning about this case?
Well, Mississippi is still burning.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I find interesting is the fact that the reporters, the podcasters that covered this particular case, they referred to the sundown town, they made a sundown town reference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important for people to understand that they still exist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anybody familiar with the Breakfast Club interview with Larry Elder tried to make a strong case that racism doesn't exist as it did when our parents were growing up, and grandparents for some, and great grandparents for others, who didn't have to live and survive through, the Jim Crow era. Well, this particular case happened in, I believe it was back in January.
Yep.
And, so much for that. And this is fresh off of the case where a young brother, Tyree Nichols, was killed, I believe. So, this is just the good old boy network working again. And when you have these small towns, and I believe that's what the reference was for that idiot that came up with that song, Tried in a Small Town. This is what he was referring to. He was referring to modern day lynching, which is that was the attempt. It just so happened that the young brother survived the encounter, even though one was, was facially disfigured in the matter. And this isn't police. This is not just police terrorism here. Someone said police brutality. This is not police brutality. This is even above police terrorism. These are war crimes. If you look at what happened to those young brothers in that bathtub, it's not too much different than what happened that had all of those military officers arrested in Guantanamo Bay.
They did get waterboarded.
Right. So to have them shocked, those are water shocks. That's the things that those are methods that are typically carried out by the CIA when they're trying to get some information off of a perceived war criminal. So it's a war crime. That must mean that the black community is still being warred on. Well, just a few weeks earlier, we were celebrating black people fighting on the pier.
Yeah.
And so where is that spark that was supposed to come from that to prevent situations like this? Now, I understand this happened before the Alabama, the Montgomery, Alabama pier fight. I understand this happened before that. But this is not uncommon. And I'm going to tell you the differences here. First and foremost, these officers have a track record. These particular, these race soldiers, let's be clear, that's what they are, identified themselves as the Thug Squad?
Squad.
The Goon Squad. Yeah, the Goon Squad. They already prided themselves on being thugs of the community. That small township, which is right outside of the bastion of Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital of the capital of Mississippi, which is a predominantly black community. We just went over this about a year ago, when Jackson was struggling with its water troubles. The black community is facing all types of warfare down there. What's the response to it, though? Because it can't consistently be marching in the streets. It can't be holding picket signs and saying no justice, no peace. These officers, from what I understand, they're under indictment right now, right?
Oh, they've played it guilty and they're waiting for sentencing.
Okay. So that's cool. We have to also understand something else. There's two other things I want to just point out real quick before I'll let you unleash Pat, because he's sitting there revving up. Right? He in the bathroom doing push-ups. He ready. So one, white supremacy is always comfortable with sacrificing some of its own to push or maintain the policies of racism, white supremacy on us.
Say it again, brother.
You know what I'm saying? They will sacrifice one of their own. So the arrest in the upcoming lawsuit ain't even the guilty pleas. This isn't a victory for us, because it's going to happen again. It has happened since then, and it's going to continue to happen again. The fact that some of those officers already were exonerated from other killings just lets you know that if this situation wasn't so egregious, and if it wasn't for the fact that it was covered on social media, because there seemed to be a local media blackout around this particular case, which is typical. White folks stay on code when it comes to stuff like this. But we must also understand there's another aspect to this too. And the other aspect is they don't fear any retribution from us, because we don't operate like a nation and black people, a nation within a nation. We don't have a community because we don't have common unity. And because you're going to have so many people saying, well, if he was a Moor, I would have done something. If he was a Hebrew, then I would have done something. You know, if he was a Muslim, I would have done something. Or you know, if he was, from my gang, this, that, and the other.
Bullshit.
Bottom line is we have a lot of reasons as to why, we pick and choose our battles around this. And one of the biggest things is, it's safer to say I don't identify with the brothers that are getting hemmed up. And be clear, until we all get on that same page, they're going to continuously pick us off, like ducks in a row. So, that's all for now. I got more, but
Yeah. To your point about like we call them the black militias. This happened in January, right? I mean, that's the word we'll use for lack of other words, but the black groups. This happened in January, right? What happened to the cops? Bro, so we don't need to talk about that no more. All right, we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to go down that road, because it's happening. It's August. So yeah.